Entire civilizations have vanished from the earth without a trace. This is the story of forgotten cataclysms, events so devastating they wiped mighty empires from history itself. You will discover 25 of history's most mysterious collapses and the crucial lessons they hold for our world today. We will explore why a sophisticated Bronze Age network shattered across 3 continents, and what caused a Pacific island society to topple its own giant statues. What do you believe is the greatest threat to our own civilization today? Around the year 1200 before the Common Era, the world went dark. A sophisticated network of empires, from the Hittites in Anatolia to the Mycenaeans in Greece, simply fell apart. This was not a slow decline but a swift, violent unraveling. Grand palaces that had stood for centuries were burned to the ground. Complex international trade routes, the lifeblood of this Bronze Age world, snapped. The very skill of writing, a hallmark of their advanced administration, disappeared for generations, plunging the region into a profound silence. Historians call this event the Bronze Age collapse, and it stands as one of history's most chilling examples of a total systemic failure. The cause was not a single disaster, but a cascade of them. A prolonged drought likely triggered widespread crop failure and famine, weakening these centralized states from within. At the same time, internal rebellions and social unrest fractured their political cores. Then came the final blow, a shadowy confederation known only as the Sea Peoples. These mysterious invaders arrived by ship, attacking coastlines and overwhelming already strained defenses. It was a perfect storm of environmental stress, internal division, and external assault. The collapse proves that a civilization's greatest strength, its complexity and interconnectedness, can become its greatest weakness when multiple crises strike at once. The fall of these Bronze Age empires offers a sobering lesson about fragility, a theme that will echo through the ruins of every forgotten cataclysm we explore. Even a dominant civilization can be brought to its knees by a single, violent act of nature. Far to the south of those collapsing Bronze Age empires, the Minoans of Crete had built a vibrant and sophisticated society. They constructed labyrinthine palaces with advanced plumbing and decorated them with breathtaking art, a culture seemingly at the peak of its power. Then, around the year 1600 before the Common Era, their world was shattered by a geological cataclysm. The volcanic island of Thera, modern Santorini, exploded in one of the most violent eruptions humanity has ever witnessed. The scale is almost incomprehensible. The blast was many times more powerful than the eruption of Krakatoa. It would have generated tsunamis of staggering height, colossal walls of water racing across the sea to smash into the northern coast of Crete. These waves obliterated vital ports and coastal settlements, the very heart of Minoan maritime trade. The sky then filled with a torrent of ash, blanketing the island and poisoning the fertile soil. Agriculture, the foundation of their wealth, would have collapsed for years. The Minoan civilization did not vanish in an instant, but its power was irrevocably broken. The elaborate palaces were never fully restored. A culture that had once dominated the Aegean was left profoundly weakened, vulnerable to conquest. Within a few centuries, they were absorbed by the rising power of the Mycenaeans from mainland Greece. The eruption of Thera stands as a stark reminder that human achievement is no match for the raw, untamed power of the planet. It demonstrates how a single geological event can fatally undermine a society, setting in motion an irreversible decline into obscurity. Centuries after the Minoan palaces crumbled, another magnificent civilization was quietly engineering its own demise. Deep in the jungles of Central America, The classic Maya built sprawling cities adorned with towering pyramids and perfected a calendar of staggering complexity. Then, between the 8th and 9th centuries, the southern lowlands fell silent. One by one, the great city-states were abandoned, their stone plazas and royal courts swallowed by the relentless green of the jungle. This was not a sudden invasion or a single volcanic blast, but a slow-motion unraveling driven by a cascade of human and environmental failures. A prolonged and severe drought lasting for decades parched the land. This climatic shift was made infinitely worse by the Maya themselves. To feed their growing populations, they had cleared vast tracts of forest for intensive agriculture. This deforestation triggered severe soil erosion, stripping away the fertile land they depended on. As crops failed, famine spread. The social contract, the belief in the divine power of kings who were supposed to ensure rain and plenty, shattered. In a desperate scramble for dwindling resources, warfare between once allied city-states intensified, becoming more frequent and more brutal. The inscriptions on their stone monuments tell a story of escalating conflict, and then, abruptly, they stop. The silence that follows is deafening. The Maya collapse is a profound lesson in how a society can become tragically vulnerable to the very environment it has exploited. It demonstrates that a civilization's greatest challenges can often come not from the outside, but from within its own borders and its own choices. While the Maya faced a crisis of their own making, another ancient society met its end through the slow betrayal of the very river that gave it life. The great cities of the Indus Valley civilization, also known as the Harappan people, were marvels of the ancient world, flourishing at the same time as the pyramid builders of Egypt and the ziggurat raisers of Mesopotamia. They constructed metropolises like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa with a level of planning that seems almost modern. Their streets were laid out in perfect grids. They built the world's first known sophisticated water supply and sewage systems, with indoor bathrooms and drains that would not become common again for thousands of years. This was a society of remarkable order and public health. Yet, by around 1900 before the Common Era, these grand urban centers were being systematically abandoned. The great baths fell silent and the bustling streets emptied out. There was no evidence of a massive invasion, no layers of ash from a volcanic explosion. Instead, the end came with a whisper. The leading theory points to a profound environmental shift. The lifeblood of this civilization was the mighty Indus River and its network of tributaries. Over centuries, the rivers began to change their courses, slowly shifting away from the heartland of the Harappan cities. This was not a sudden flood, but a gradual draining away of their agricultural sustenance. Imagine the slow, creeping dread as the river that once guaranteed their harvests began to recede, year after year, decade after decade. To make matters worse, evidence suggests the monsoon patterns that fed these rivers also began to weaken and change. The dual assault of a dying river system and a faltering climate meant that the farms that fed these vast urban populations could no longer produce enough food. The people had no choice but to leave. They did not vanish, but rather they migrated slowly eastward toward the Ganges River basin in smaller, more scattered villages. Their urban identity, their written language, and their complex social structures could not survive this dispersal. The story of the Indus Valley is not one of a dramatic explosion, but of a quiet fading. It teaches us that a civilization's greatest asset can become its single point of failure. Their entire world was built upon a river that ultimately and slowly walked away from them. The Hittite Empire commanded the highlands of Anatolia with an iron grip. These were the people who challenged the pharaohs of Egypt at the legendary Battle of Kadesh. a military superpower whose influence stretched across the ancient Near East. Their capital, Hattusa, was a formidable fortress city, protected by immense walls and gateways guarded by stone lions and sphinxes. Yet, around the year 1180 before the Common Era, this empire evaporated from the historical record. Its collapse was so total that its language and even its very existence were forgotten for over 3,000 years. While the shadowy sea peoples were certainly raiding their coastlines and internal rebellions were stirring, the true killer of the Hittite Empire was far more mundane and far more relentless. It was a severe, prolonged drought that stretched for years, perhaps even decades. Imagine the slow, creeping disaster as the rains failed, season after season. The fertile plains that fed the Hittite heartland turned to dust. Crop failures on such a scale would have triggered widespread famine, a force that no army, no matter how well trained, can possibly fight. The authority of the king in the capital was built on a simple, ancient bargain, the promise of security and sustenance in return for loyalty. When the granaries emptied, that sacred contract was broken. Famine weakened the state from within, crippling its ability to pay and feed its professional army. At the same time, the subject peoples under Hittite control, who are also starving, would have seen little reason to remain loyal to a central power that could no longer protect them or fill their bellies. The empire was caught in a vicious cycle, its agricultural foundation crumbling, which in turn made it vulnerable to every external shock and internal revolt. The fall of the Hittites delivers a brutal and timeless lesson. It proves that military might and political power are ultimately illusions, fragile constructs that depend entirely on something as basic as a successful harvest. When the land itself turns against a civilization, even the greatest empires can be brought to their knees by the simple, silent absence of rain. Far from the silent ruins of the Hittite heartland, another empire was slowly being strangled by the changing currents of global commerce. The kingdom of Axum, a powerhouse in the highlands of Ethiopia and Eritrea, once commanded the trade routes between the Roman Empire and India. Its merchants grew fabulously wealthy, and its kings issued their own gold coins, a statement of economic confidence recognized from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. Yet from the 7th century of the Common Era onward, this beacon of wealth and power began to dim. The world was changing around it, and Axum was being left behind. The rise of the Islamic caliphates fundamentally redrew the map of global trade. As the new empire expanded, it consolidated control over the Red Sea and the lucrative routes that passed through the Persian Gulf. Suddenly, the ships that had for centuries docked at Axum's ports like Adulis began to sail elsewhere. It was as if the economic lifeblood of the kingdom was being diverted into another body entirely. The wealth that had funded its monumental obelisks and royal palaces slowly dried up. This external economic shock was compounded by a slow, internal decay. Centuries of intensive agriculture and the clearing of forests for fuel and construction had stripped the land. The rich soils of the highlands, once the source of their agricultural surplus, became thin and eroded. Crop yields began to fall just as the kingdom's ability to import food through trade was evaporating. Axum was caught in a perfect vice, squeezed between a shifting global economy and a degraded local environment. Its story is a stark lesson in interconnected vulnerabilities. A civilization can be immensely powerful, minting its own currency and trading across oceans, yet still find itself isolated and impoverished when the world decides to take a different path. The kingdom did not fall in a dramatic conquest, but rather faded into a quiet provincial existence, a ghost of its former glory, reminding us that economic and environmental pressures can combine to leave even the greatest players stranded by history. Across the Atlantic, a different kind of mystery was unfolding in the very heart of North America. The city of Cahokia rose near the Mississippi River, a sprawling metropolis that was, around the year 1050, the largest city north of Mexico. Its population may have rivaled that of London at the same time. This was a place of immense earthworks, dominated by the colossal Monk's Mound, a towering platform of soil that required millions of baskets of dirt to construct. For centuries, this was a vibrant hub of trade, ceremony, and community. Then, by the 1400s, it was entirely empty. The great plazas fell silent, and the grand mounds were left to the elements. Unlike the empires of the Old World, Cahokia left no written records to explain its demise. Its collapse is a puzzle we must solve from the soil itself, from tree rings and discarded refuse. The city's sheer size and density likely became its own undoing. Such a concentrated population would have placed an enormous strain on local resources, leading to deforestation for building and fuel and the overhunting of local game. The fertile land that once supported them may have been simply worn out. At the same time, a shift in the climate brought a period of cooler temperatures, which would have shortened the growing season for their primary crop, maize. Even a small dip in the annual corn harvest could have been catastrophic for a society so dependent on it. As resources grew scarce, the social order would have frayed. The authority of the chiefs and priests, who may have claimed a special connection to the forces of nature, would have crumbled if they could no longer guarantee a good harvest. We see evidence of a palisade, a large defensive wall, built around the central precinct in its later years, a clear sign of rising social tension and internal conflict. The people of Cahokia did not vanish from the earth, but they did abandon their great city, dispersing into smaller, more sustainable communities. Their story is a powerful testament to the fact that a civilization does not need a dramatic invasion or a volcanic eruption to fail. Sometimes the slow, creeping pressures of a changing environment and the internal strains of a massive society are more than enough to empty even the grandest of cities, leaving only silent mounds as monuments to a forgotten American metropolis. The silence that fell over the Greenland settlements was as deep and permanent as the winter ice. For nearly 500 years, Norse communities thrived on the green coasts of the New World, building stone churches and farming the same way their ancestors had in Norway. Yet by the middle of the 15th century, every single settler had vanished, leaving behind only their empty longhouses and a haunting historical mystery. These were not helpless victims, they were Vikings, descendants of the most formidable explorers and survivors of the medieval world. Their end was not written by a sudden cataclysm, but by a slow, creeping cold that they stubbornly refused to outsmart. The culprit was the Little Ice Age, a climatic shift that gradually gripped the North Atlantic. As temperatures dropped, the already short growing season became impossibly brief. The hay needed to feed their livestock through the brutal winters grew scarcer each year. Sea ice, a formidable barrier, began to choke the shipping lanes for longer periods, isolating the colonies from the vital trade with Iceland and mainland Europe. They were being cut off and starved, not by a hostile army, but by the very climate that had once been mild enough to entice them. The true tragedy, however, lies in what was happening just a short distance away. The Inuit people, masters of the Arctic environment, thrived in these same conditions. They built skin boats for hunting seals and whales in the icy waters, crafted warm clothing from animal pelts, and developed a nomadic lifestyle that followed the food sources. The Norse had every opportunity to learn from them, to adapt their survival techniques. Yet they held fast to their European identity. They saw themselves as Christians and farmers, a cultural identity they believed was superior. To adopt the ways of the Inuit, whom they called Skraelings, was unthinkable, a form of cultural surrender. So they continued to try to grow barley on frozen ground and starve in their stone houses, surrounded by a sea full of food they did not know how to harvest. The last Norse Greenlander did not perish in a dramatic battle with the elements, but in a quiet, stubborn refusal to change. Their story is one of the clearest and most heartbreaking lessons from history, a warning that the most dangerous threat a civilization can face is not the change in its environment, but the rigidity of its own mind. The stubbornness that doomed the Norse finds a haunting parallel in the jungles of Southeast Asia, where a civilization of unparalleled grandeur was slowly defeated by the very system that once made it great. The Khmer Empire, with its magnificent capital at Angkor, was the largest continuous empire in the region's history, a realm of staggering architectural ambition. Its crown jewel was a sprawling metropolis sustained by a masterpiece of hydraulic engineering, an intricate network of canals, reservoirs, and moats that tamed the monsoon's deluge and stored water for the dry season. This system was the empire's beating heart, allowing it to support a population of perhaps 1 million people and construct wonders like Angkor Wat. Yet this brilliant infrastructure became the source of its undoing. Starting in the 14th century, the climate began to turn against the Khmer. The region was struck by a brutal cycle of climatic extremes, swinging violently between intense, punishing monsoons and severe, prolonged droughts. The very canals designed to manage water were now overwhelmed by it. Torrential rains would have caused catastrophic flooding, eroding the earthworks and silting up the vital reservoirs. Then, in the dry seasons, the cracked and damaged system could no longer hold enough water to see the massive population through. The empire's agricultural foundation, which had once produced 3 or 4 rice harvests a year, began to crumble. Imagine the slow, grinding failure as the great reservoirs or barrays, which were the pride of the god kings, gradually emptied, their beds baking in the sun. Famine and social unrest would have been inevitable. At the same time, the economic world was shifting. Maritime trade routes were gaining prominence, and new powers like the Thera kingdom to the west began to rise, drawing commerce and influence away from the land-based Khmer Empire. Squeezed by environmental collapse and economic pressure, the magnificent capital of Angkor became unsustainable. The court eventually moved its power base to the coast, and the great city was slowly, deliberately abandoned to the jungle. Its fate is a profound lesson in the fragility of complexity. The Khmer did not fall to a mighty army, but to a series of weather events that broke the brilliant yet brittle system they had built to control nature. Their story asks us a difficult question: how many of our own modern marvels of engineering could become our greatest vulnerabilities when the climate itself begins to shift? The haunting stone faces of Easter Island stand as eternal sentinels over a societal graveyard. This remote civilization, known as the Rapa Nui, did not merely erect the Moai statues, they engaged in an obsession that would ultimately consume them. The prevailing narrative, pieced together from pollen samples and archaeological evidence, tells a story of ecological suicide. When Polynesian settlers first reached the island around 1200, they found a lush subtropical paradise covered in a forest of giant palm trees. This forest was the island's life support system, providing wood for homes, fibers for rope, and most critically, the massive logs needed to transport the multi-ton Moai statues across the landscape. Generation after generation, the Rapa Nui cut down these trees, driven by an intensifying competition between clans to build ever larger and more impressive monuments. They were clearing their own life raft plank by plank. The consequences were catastrophic and irreversible. With the last tree felled, the topsoil, no longer anchored by roots, washed away in the rains. The bird populations that nested in the forests vanished. Most devastating of all, the islanders lost the ability to build seaworthy canoes. They could no longer fish in deep waters or hunt porpoises, a primary source of protein. Trapped on their barren island, the society descended into chaos. Famine gripped the population. The archaeological record reveals a dark turn, with ancient garbage heaps showing a sudden and gruesome increase in human bones, evidence of starvation and perhaps even cannibalism. Clan warfare erupted over the few remaining resources, and toppled moai lie where they fell, broken symbols of a collapsed social order. The population crashed from a possible high of 15,000 to just a few thousand by the time European explorers arrived. And then there is the script, the Rongorongo script, a series of intricate glyphs carved on wooden tablets, remains one of the world's great undeciphered mysteries. Was it a final, desperate attempt to record their history and their knowledge as their world fell apart? We may never know, for the language and the meaning died with the last elder who could read it. Easter Island is a stark, terrifying metaphor for our entire planet, a perfect microcosm of a closed system with limited resources. The Rapa Nui did not see themselves as destroying their entire world. They were just cutting trees to honor their ancestors. Their story forces us to ask, what are the modern equivalents of those towering palm trees, and are we, right now, in the process of cutting down our last one? The world of the Mycenaean Greeks was one of warrior kings and sprawling palaces, the very setting for Homer's epic tales of the Trojan War. These were the people who built the monumental Lion Gate at Mycenae and ruled from fortified citadels across the Greek mainland. Yet around the year 1200 before the Common Era, their entire civilization came crashing down in fire and chaos. The grand palaces at Mycenae, Pylos, and Turins were violently destroyed, their storerooms looted and their walls burned. This was not an isolated event, but a core part of the systemic Bronze Age collapse that shattered the entire eastern Mediterranean. The Mycenaean economy was a tightly controlled, top-down system centered on the palace. Scribes using the Linear B script meticulously recorded every jar of olive oil, every measure of grain, and every piece of bronze. This complex bureaucracy was the civilization's strength, but it also made it incredibly brittle. When the international trade routes that supplied them with vital goods like tin and luxury items were severed, the entire economic foundation began to crack. The palace could no longer supply the artisans and soldiers who depended on it. At the same time, a severe and prolonged drought likely strained agricultural production, leading to food shortages and famine. This created a powder keg of social unrest. It is easy to imagine a desperate population, starving and disillusioned, turning against the ruling elite who had failed in their most basic duty to ensure prosperity and protection. Internal rebellion may have been the spark that set the palaces ablaze. Then came the final, external shock, the shadowy sea peoples. While these maritime raiders may not have been the sole cause, their attacks on coastal settlements would have been a devastating blow to a kingdom already reeling from internal collapse. The result was a total unraveling. The knowledge of writing, the intricate art of fresco painting, the skill of monumental architecture, all of it was lost. Greece was plunged into a dark age that would last for centuries, a period of poverty, isolation, and illiteracy. The memory of the Mycenaean heroes lived on only in oral poetry, a faded echo of a world that had been utterly erased. Their fall is a stark lesson in the fragility of interconnected systems, proving that when a civilization's economic, social, and environmental supports fail simultaneously, even the most heroic of cultures can be silenced for generations. High in the thin air of the Andean Altiplano, the city of Tiwanaku was a marvel of human ingenuity. For centuries, this empire thrived at an altitude that would challenge most other civilizations, its capital a sprawling center of ceremony and power. Yet by the year 1000 of the Common Era, its grand temples and monoliths stood silent, gazing out over a landscape that had turned against its people. The empire did not fall to a conquering army, but to a slow, invisible enemy, a profound and prolonged drought revealed to us today in the layers of ancient lake sediments. The genius of the Tiwanaku had always been their agriculture. They transformed the harsh, high plains into a fertile breadbasket using a system of raised fields. These were vast, elevated planting platforms surrounded by canals of water. The water absorbed heat during the day and released it at night, creating a microclimate that protected crops from the frequent frosts. It was an engineering masterpiece capable of feeding a vast urban population. But this system had one critical vulnerability. It depended entirely on a predictable climate, specifically consistent rainfall to replenish those life-giving canals. When the rains failed, not for a season but for decades, the entire system collapsed. The canals dried up, the protective microclimate vanished, the frosts returned to kill the crops. The raised fields, once so productive, became barren geometric patterns etched into a dying land. Famine would have spread through the city, breaking the spiritual authority of the priesthood and the kings who were believed to command the very forces of nature. Why remain loyal to a god who cannot bring rain? The social order dissolved, and the people had no choice but to abandon their stone city, dispersing into smaller, more mobile communities in search of water. The silence that settled over Tiwanaku is a testament to a brutal truth. A civilization's greatest innovation can become its single point of failure. Their entire world was built upon a brilliant yet brittle adaptation to their environment, and when that environment shifted, there was no backup plan. They were experts in a world that no longer existed. The colossal stone heads of the Olmecs stare out from the jungles of Mexico, their expressions impassive and eternal. These monumental sculptures are the legacy of Mesoamerica's mother culture, the people who laid the foundations for every subsequent civilization in the region, from the Maya to the Aztecs. From around 1500 to 400 before the Common Era, their heartland along the Gulf Coast thrived, centered on great ceremonial complexes like San Lorenzo and La Venta. These were not just villages but planned urban centers with elaborate drainage systems and towering earthen pyramids, a testament to sophisticated social organization. Yet by 400 before the Common Era, the vibrant core of this influential society was largely abandoned. The great plazas fell silent, and the colossal heads were deliberately buried, some positioned to face away from the once sacred spaces. This was not a sudden invasion, but a gradual, deliberate fade into obscurity. The cause appears rooted in the very ground beneath their feet. Geological evidence reveals a landscape in turmoil. Significant tectonic activity, a shifting of the Earth's plates, likely altered the fundamental geography of the region. The river courses that were the lifeblood of Olmec agriculture and transportation began to change, shifting away from their major centers. Imagine the slow, creeping disaster as the river that supplied your water and carried your trade goods simply moved, leaving your city stranded. The fertile floodplains that once guaranteed bountiful harvests of maize would have become unreliable, leading to food shortages and forcing populations to disperse. Compounding this environmental instability, archaeologists believe the Olmecs may have ritually desanctified their own cities before leaving. The careful burial of the massive stone heads and other monuments suggests a ceremonial closing, a final act of reverence for the powerful spirits of a place they could no longer inhabit. The Olmec civilization did not vanish. Its people and their profound cultural innovations, like the ritual ball game and a complex calendar system, migrated and were absorbed by the rising cultures they had inspired. Their heartland, however, was left to the jungle. The abandonment of the Olmec core is a humbling lesson. It proves that being a foundational mother culture offers no protection against the slow, grinding power of a changing planet. A civilization can plant the seeds for future empires, yet still see its own homeland rendered uninhabitable by the restless earth itself. The stone pharaohs of Kush once gazed north, their power rivaling that of Egypt itself. This was no minor kingdom, but a formidable African empire that conquered its northern neighbor and installed the 25th dynasty of Black Pharaohs. From their capital at Meroe, the Kushites commanded the Nile corridor for over 1,000 years, their wealth built on iron, gold, and control of vital trade routes. Yet by the middle of the 4th century, this great power had dissolved, its grand pyramids at Meroe left to the encroaching sand. The end was not a single event, but a slow asphyxiation. The lifeblood of the kingdom was the fertile land along the Nile, but its agricultural hinterlands were slowly turning to desert. A creeping dryness, a process we call desertification, began to claim the fields that fed the population. Each year, the sand gained a little more ground, and the kingdom's capacity to sustain itself shrank. This environmental pressure was compounded by a seismic shift in the region's economic geography. The rising power of the Axumite kingdom, located in the highlands of modern Ethiopia, began to redirect trade. The lucrative routes that had once flowed through Kush, carrying ivory, ebony, and incense to the Roman world, were now being drawn eastward toward Axum's Red Sea ports. Kush was being economically isolated, its primary source of wealth drying up just as its farmland was vanishing. The final, definitive blow likely came from that very rival. Historical records from Axum describe a military campaign across the Red Sea, an invasion that may have targeted a weakened and vulnerable Kush. A kingdom already starved for resources and trade could muster little defense. The story of Kush is a classic tale of a civilization caught in a vice. It was crushed between the slow, relentless pressure of a changing environment and the swift, sharp ascent of a competing power. Its fall reminds us that even the most established empires are not insulated from the dual threats of a deteriorating landscape and the rise of ambitious new neighbors. The Moch people of Peru's north coast were masters of earth and fire. They built immense adobe pyramids that still dominate the desert landscape, and their artisans produced goldwork and ceramics of breathtaking artistry. Their society, which flourished for centuries, seemed as permanent as the mountains behind them. Then, around 600 or 700 of the Common Era, their world fractured. The great ceremonial centers, the hearts of Moch political and religious life, were systematically abandoned. The story of their collapse is not one of a slow decline, but of a swift and brutal dismantling by a chaotic climate. High in the Andes, the long-frozen record of ice cores tells a stark tale. These ancient layers reveal a period of intense, prolonged drought that gripped the region for perhaps 30 years. The Moch's sophisticated irrigation canals, which channeled water from the rivers to their fields, would have run dry. Their farms, the foundation of their urban society, withered under the unrelenting sun. Famine surely began to stalk the land, weakening the social order and eroding faith in the rulers and priests who claimed to intercede with the gods. Then the climate delivered its knockout blow. The same ice cores show a sudden, violent shift. The decades of drought were shattered by a mega El Niño event, a catastrophic warming of Pacific waters that unleashed torrential rains and biblical flooding upon the coast. Can you imagine the scene? The very irrigation networks that lay empty and crumbling were now overwhelmed by walls of water and mud. These flash floods would have scoured the landscape, sweeping away entire villages and burying fields under sterile silt. The Moch's entire agricultural system, carefully engineered for a stable desert environment, was utterly destroyed in a geological instant. This 1-2 punch of climatic extremes was more than their civilization could bear. The central authority, already weakened by drought, lost all legitimacy. What use is a god king who cannot bring rain, or worse, one who brings a deluge? The people likely fractured into smaller, competing groups, fighting over the few remaining patches of fertile land. The political unity of the Moch shattered, and their grand urban centers were left to the encroaching sand. Their story is a terrifyingly modern lesson in velocity. A sophisticated and resilient culture, one that had endured for centuries, was taken apart in a matter of a few generations by the violent mood swings of a changing planet. It forces us to wonder how our own complex systems would fare against a similar onslaught of back-to-back environmental disasters. The desert city of Petra was a miracle of water in a sea of stone. The Nabateans, masters of this arid kingdom, did not merely survive in the desert, they thrived by bending it to their will. They carved breathtaking temples and tombs directly into the rose-red cliffs, but their true genius lay hidden in the rock, a labyrinth of channels, dams, and cisterns that captured every precious drop of winter rain. This hydraulic empire controlled the most valuable commodity in the region, water, and they built their wealth upon it by becoming the undisputed lords of the overland incense trade. Camel caravans laden with frankincense and myrrh would stop at Petra, paying for water and protection as they moved these priceless goods from Arabia to the Mediterranean. For centuries, this was an economic empire built on thirst and geography. Then the world changed around them. In the year 106 of the Common Era, the Roman Empire formally annexed the Nabatean kingdom. This brought a degree of stability, but it also began to unravel their unique advantage. The Romans, with their vast resources and naval prowess, began to favor a different path. They developed sophisticated maritime routes through the Red Sea, allowing ships to carry goods directly from Arabia to Egyptian ports, bypassing the long, expensive, and dangerous overland journey through Petra entirely. It was an economic reorientation that happened not with a bang, but with a quiet, relentless shift of commerce from land to sea. The caravans grew smaller and less frequent. The wealth that had funded Petra's monumental architecture and sustained its complex water system began to dry up as surely as a desert stream in summer. The final blow was likely geological. A massive earthquake struck the region in the year 363, causing widespread damage. While the Nabateans were brilliant engineers, their sophisticated water management system was a fragile masterpiece. The earthquake would have shattered the delicate stone channels and cracked the cisterns, causing catastrophic leaks. A civilization that had tamed the desert for centuries now found itself with a broken water system and a bankrupt economy, unable to fund the massive repairs required. There were no armies to storm the sick, no dramatic invasion. The people simply left, unable to sustain their magnificent city when its economic reason for existence had sailed away. Petra's silence is a profound lesson in economic fragility. It asks us, what are the modern equivalents of those incense trade routes? Our entire global economy is built on intricate networks of trade and technology. What happens if those routes, physical or digital, are suddenly rendered obsolete? The fate of the Nabateans stands as a stark warning that a civilization's greatest skill can become utterly irrelevant when the world decides to move in a different direction. Deep beneath the scorching sands of the Sahara, an empire was living on borrowed time. The Garamontes did not merely survive in the desert, they conquered it, building a network of cities in what is now Libya. Their secret was a vast, hidden web of tunnels known as fagaras that stretched for hundreds of miles. These ingenious passages tapped into an ancient aquifer, a reservoir of fossil water that had been trapped underground for millennia. This was not a renewable resource, it was a one-time inheritance, a treasure chest buried deep in the earth. For centuries, they spent this liquid wealth with spectacular success, channeling it to the surface to create lush agricultural oases where fields of wheat, dates, and grapes flourished against all odds. Their capital, Garoma, became a bustling hub, a desert metropolis sustained by this seemingly miraculous engineering. Yet every tunnel, every canal was drawing down a finite reserve. The water table began a slow, inexorable retreat, sinking further from the reach of their tunnels. Maintaining the fagaras became a desperate, losing battle against the accumulating sand and the receding water. Each generation had to dig deeper, work harder for a little less return. Their agricultural yields began to fall, and the green patches that dotted the desert started to shrink back, slowly strangled by thirst. There was no single moment of collapse, no invading army or dramatic catastrophe. The end came with a whisper as the last of the fossil water was finally exhausted. The fields turned to dust, the cities emptied, and the relentless desert sands swept back in to reclaim their own. By around 700 of the Common Era, the Garamantian civilization was gone, leaving behind only silent ruins and a profound warning. They are a stark example of a society that achieved the impossible, only to discover that their greatest triumph was built on a foundation that could not last. Their story forces us to look at our own world, at the vast aquifers beneath places like the American Midwest or the North China Plain that are being pumped dry for agriculture today. Are we, like the Garamantes, brilliantly and efficiently mining a resource that one day will simply run out? The stone walls of Great Zimbabwe rose from the African savanna, a testament to a kingdom of immense wealth and influence. This was no isolated outpost, but the heart of a sophisticated state that controlled the flow of gold and ivory from the interior to the Swahili coast. For centuries, its rulers lived in a magnificent stone complex, its conical tower and massive enclosures symbolizing a power built on trade and tribute. Yet by the 15th century, this grand capital was being quietly abandoned, its royal court moving north to establish new centers of power. The city's decline was a slow unraveling, a story of an environment pushed past its breaking point. To sustain the city's large population and support the industries that fueled its wealth, the surrounding forests were steadily cleared for fuel, building, and to create new farmland. This deforestation had a cascading effect. Without tree roots to anchor it, the fertile topsoil was washed away by seasonal rains, leaving the land exhausted and less productive with each passing year. The very agricultural foundation that supported the city's artisans, traders, and elites was crumbling. At the same time, the kingdom's economic lifeline was being severed. New trade routes were opening along the Zambezi Valley, drawing the lucrative gold and ivory commerce away from the southern plateau. Great Zimbabwe, once the central hub, found itself on the periphery of a shifting economic map. The combination was devastating. A weakened local environment could no longer support the population, just as the wealth that could have mitigated the crisis was flowing elsewhere. The rulers made a pragmatic, if stark, decision. They simply left, moving their court to lands that were more fertile and better positioned to tap into the new trade networks. The Great Stone City was not destroyed by war or a natural disaster, but was gradually emptied by the slow, cumulative pressures of a degraded landscape and a redirected economy. Its silent, sprawling ruins pose a silent question to our own world. How many of our great cities are vulnerable to the same subtle, dual threats of environmental exhaustion and the fickle nature of global commerce. Their magnificent cliff dwellings still cling to the canyon walls, silent cities of stone that seem to defy gravity itself. The ancestral Puebloans, often called the Anasazi, were master architects of the arid American Southwest, constructing vast, multi-story complexes in sheer rock faces. These were not temporary shelters but permanent, thriving communities, complete with ceremonial kivas and storerooms filled with maize. Then, in the late 13th century, they walked away from it all. They left behind their homes, their granaries, and the entire Four Corners region, a mass exodus that remains one of North America's most profound archaeological mysteries. The evidence points to a slow, grinding enemy, a great drought that gripped the land for decades. In a landscape where water was always precious, this prolonged dry spell would have been catastrophic. The delicate desert agriculture they depended on, the carefully tended fields of corn, beans, and squash, simply withered and died in the unrelenting sun. But was it only the drought? Such extreme environmental stress would have strained the very fabric of their society. As resources dwindled, cooperation likely gave way to competition. Archaeologists find evidence of increased violence in this period, with some settlements built in more defensible positions and others showing signs of conflict. The social contract, the shared beliefs and rituals that held communities together, may have fractured under the pressure of hunger and fear. Faced with a homeland that could no longer sustain them, they made an agonizing choice. They did not vanish, but rather they migrated, journeying south and east toward the life-giving waters of the Rio Grande and other river valleys. There, their descendants would become the Pueblo peoples, preserving their culture in new forms. This was not a failure, but a strategic retreat, a testament to the resilience of a people who chose to adapt and move rather than perish in a place that had turned against them. Their story echoes a difficult truth we all must ponder. When the land itself can no longer provide, what do we hold onto, and what are we willing to leave behind? The same desert winds that carried the scent of frankincense also whispered of a kingdom's fading power. The legendary kingdom of Saba, the very land of the Queen of Sheba, built its fabulous wealth not on gold but on fragrance. Its control of the overland incense routes made it the indispensable middleman for the ancient world's most coveted goods, frankincense and myrrh. These aromatic resins were more than mere luxuries. They were the very breath of ancient religion, burned in temples from Rome to Persia as essential offerings to the gods. For centuries, Saba's merchants grew immensely rich from this spiritual commerce. But by the 3rd century of the Common Era, the world began to turn away from the desert caravans. The Romans, masters of logistics, had perfected maritime travel in the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. Why risk a long, costly, and dangerous overland journey through bandit-infested deserts when a ship could carry more incense, faster and cheaper, directly from southern Arabia to Egyptian ports? It was an economic rerouting as profound as the shift from landlines to cellular networks, and it left the Sabaean kingdom stranded, watching its primary source of revenue literally sail away. Yet the second blow was perhaps even more devastating. The Roman Empire, Saba's most important customer, was undergoing a profound cultural transformation. With the adoption of Christianity as the state religion, the demand for pagan aromatics plummeted. The new faith had no need for vast quantities of frankincense to burn in sacrifices to a pantheon of forgotten gods. The market for Saba's primary export, a market built over 1,000 years, simply evaporated. The kingdom was caught in a perfect storm of shifting trade and changing faith. Its legendary wealth, once seemingly as eternal as the desert itself, drained away, the Great Marab Dam, a symbol of its agricultural prosperity, fell into disrepair without the funds to maintain it. Impoverished and isolated, the once great kingdom of Saba could no longer resist the pressure from rising neighboring powers, and it was gradually absorbed into the Himyarite kingdom. Its fate is a stark lesson in economic obsolescence. A civilization can possess immense wealth and a legendary reputation, yet still find itself rendered irrelevant by changes in technology and belief happening far beyond its borders. The fate of a civilization can be written in the shifting path of a river. Far to the east of the Mediterranean collapse, in the stark landscapes of Central Asia, the Oxus civilization built a world of fortified citadels and intricate art. Also known as the Bactria Margiana archaeological complex, this was a sophisticated Bronze Age culture that flourished for centuries, a hub of trade connecting the Indus Valley to the Iranian plateau. Their cities, like Ghana de Pere, were marvels of planning with high walls, residential quarters, and temples showcasing a unique spiritual life. Yet around 1700 years before the Common Era, these urban centers were systematically abandoned, their streets left to the desert winds. There is no evidence of a violent conquest, no layers of ash from a burning invasion. The end was quieter and in many ways more terrifying. The lifeblood of this civilization was the Amu Darya River, known in antiquity as the Oxus, and its network of tributaries. These waterways transformed an arid region into a green belt of agricultural prosperity. The people built extensive irrigation canals to channel the water to their fields of wheat and barley, creating the surplus that allowed their cities to thrive. But the climate was changing. Scientific evidence points to a prolonged period of aridity that settled over the region. The rivers that had once flowed reliably began to shrink, their courses shifting away from the heartland or drying up entirely. Imagine the slow, creeping dread as the irrigation canals at the edge of the city ran dry season after season. The fields that fed the urban population would have withered, turning the green belt back into a brown desert. Without a stable water supply, the entire logic of their urban existence evaporated. The social hierarchy, the specialized crafts, the grand architecture, all of it depended on a consistent agricultural surplus that was no longer there. Faced with this existential threat, the people made a pragmatic, if heartbreaking, choice. They did not die out, but they abandoned their stone cities and their settled way of life. The population likely reverted to a nomadic pastoralist lifestyle, herding sheep and goats across the steppes, a mode of survival far more resilient in the face of a drying climate. The urban identity of the Oxus civilization, its art, its writing, and its complex social structures simply dissolved back into the landscape from which it came. Their disappearance is a profound lesson in hydrological fragility. It underscores a terrifying truth for any society built on a river in a dry land, that its entire magnificent existence is a temporary argument with the desert, an argument it will ultimately lose when the water simply decides to go elsewhere. The sands of the Taklamakan Desert hold a secret far older than the Silk Road. Within the barren wastes of western China's Tarim Basin, archaeologists made a startling discovery: the exquisitely preserved mummies of a people with European features. Dressed in colorful woolen textiles, their bodies were naturally desiccated by the dry air, leaving them as hauntingly clear portraits from a lost world. These individuals were not mere travelers, but the remnants of a thriving Bronze Age settlement that had made this now hostile landscape their home. Their very presence there rewrites the map of ancient human migration. Yet their story is not one of conquest, but of quiet surrender to an encroaching enemy. Their settlements were built along the banks of rivers that have long since vanished from the earth. Over centuries, the climate of the region began to shift, growing progressively more arid. The rivers that were the lifeblood of these communities, providing water for their livestock and crops, began to change their courses. Some streams simply shrank, their flow reduced to a trickle before disappearing entirely. Others shifted away, leaving villages stranded in a growing sea of sand. This was the slow, relentless process of desertification, the same force that crippled the Garamantes, turning a once habitable landscape into one of the most formidable deserts on the planet. The people fought back, of course, digging wells and adapting their lives to the diminishing water. But how do you fight a battle against the sky itself? With each passing generation, the desert gained more ground. The pastures that fed their sheep turned to dust. The routes to other settlements were cut off by towering dunes. Life became a desperate, losing struggle against the sands. There were no grand battles recorded, no epic tales of a final stand. Their end was written in a different language, the silent grammar of abandonment. They simply left, gathering what they could carry and walking away from the homes their ancestors had built, seeking wetter lands to the east or south. The sands then swept in, burying their houses, their tools, and their dead, preserving them not as a monument but as a tomb. The Tarim Basin mummies are a uniquely powerful testament. They left no written history, no stone inscriptions to tell us their names or their beliefs. Their entire culture, its triumphs and its ultimate despair, is recorded only in the weave of their clothing, the tools in their graves, and the silent, determined set of their features. They are a stark reminder that climate change is not a modern abstraction, but an ancient force that has dictated the fate of civilizations for millennia. Their world did not end with a bang, but with the silent, patient creep of the desert, a warning etched in human skin and buried in sand for 4,000 years. The final blow to the Minoan world was not delivered by nature, but by a rival from across the sea. Though the Thera eruption had shattered their maritime power and crippled their economy, the Grand Palace at Knossos managed to cling to a semblance of authority for another 2 centuries. Then, around 1375 before the Common Era, fire consumed its corridors. The destruction was systematic and violent, and this time the cause was unmistakably human. The conquerors were the Mycenaeans, the warrior kings from mainland Greece. They did not just burn the palace, they occupied it. They moved into the labyrinthine complex, setting up their own administration and adapting the Minoan linear, a script, into their own form, Linear B, to record their economic transactions. In these clay tablets, we find the stark evidence of the takeover, the Greek language imposed upon the island's bureaucracy. This was more than a simple change in leadership, it was a cultural absorption. The vibrant, fluid art of the Minoans, with its depictions of leaping dolphins and graceful bull leapers, was gradually replaced by the more martial and rigid style of the Mycenaeans, featuring scenes of chariots and combat. The distinct Minoan identity, with its unique religious practices and its seemingly more peaceful, maritime-focused culture, was systematically erased, its political independence extinguished forever. This event stands as a powerful counterpoint to the environmental disasters we have explored. It demonstrates that a civilization can be wiped from the pages of history not only by earthquakes and droughts, but by the deliberate, conquering will of another people. The Minoan cataclysm was a 2-part tragedy, a 1-2 punch from both the planet and mankind, leaving a sophisticated culture first weakened by a supervolcano and then finished off by the sword. The invention of coinage should have guaranteed immortality. In the wealthy kingdom of Lydia, nestled in the rich lands of Anatolia, kings found a brilliant solution to the clumsy old system of bartering. They stamped lumps of a naturally occurring gold and silver alloy with official symbols, creating the world's first standardized currency. This simple innovation unleashed an economic revolution, making trade faster, easier, and far more efficient. Under the legendary King Croesus, Lydia's wealth became the stuff of fables, his name itself a synonym for unimaginable riches. His kingdom seemed unassailable, its power secured by its economic genius. Yet this golden age was astonishingly brief. In the 6th century before the Common Era, the rising Persian Empire, led by the brilliant strategist Cyrus the Great, marched westward. The Lydian army met them in battle, confident in its wealth and its formidable cavalry. But Cyrus had a cunning plan. Historical accounts suggest he placed his baggage camels at the front of his lines. The unfamiliar sight and smell of these strange animals spooked the Lydian horses, throwing their vaunted cavalry into disarray. The battle was a decisive victory for Persia. Croesus, the richest man in the world, was defeated and his capital, Sardis, fell. This was not merely a lost war, it was a political and cultural cataclysm. The independent kingdom of Lydia was erased from the map overnight, its territory absorbed into the vast, impersonal machinery of the Persian Empire. The Lydians continued to exist, but their unique identity, their sovereign rule, and their control over their own destiny were extinguished. Their story delivers a sharp, sobering lesson. A civilization can possess the most revolutionary technology. It can swim in rivers of gold, and yet still be conquered by a superior military force or a single clever tactic. The cataclysm that befell Lydia was not one of drought or volcano, but of geopolitics and steel. It proves that the end of a civilization's independent story can come just as abruptly from a rival's ambition as from any force of nature. The immense power of the steppe could not protect the Xiongnu from the relentless pressure of a unified enemy. For centuries, this nomadic confederacy was the nightmare of Han China, a seemingly unstoppable force of horse archers whose raids could strike without warning from the vast grasslands. Their empire was a network of tribes bound together by the charisma and military success of their leaders, a floating kingdom built on mobility and fear. Yet by the end of the 1st century, this formidable power had simply dissolved, its people scattered to the winds. The cracks began from within, with bitter succession disputes and internal rivalries fracturing the Confederacy's unity. A nomadic empire's greatest strength was its cohesion under a single strong ruler, but when that leadership was contested, the alliance of tribes could splinter into warring factions. This internal weakness created a fatal opening. The Han dynasty, after years of paying tribute and fortifying its defenses, found a new resolve. Under ambitious emperors, they switched from a defensive stance to a relentless, aggressive campaign of expansion into the steppe. Chinese armies, with their vast resources and organized infantry, began to march deep into Xiongnu territory, defeating them in pitched battles and systematically dismantling their power base. The Confederacy was caught in a vise, crumbling from internal strife while being hammered by external military force. The result was not a genocide but a great dispersal. Some Xiongnu tribes were absorbed into the Chinese frontier, their identities slowly blending into the Han cultural sphere. Others made a monumental decision, turning their horses westward and vanishing into the great expanse of Central Asia. Their westward movement sent ripples across the continent, displacing other tribes and potentially contributing to the chain of migrations that, centuries later, would press against the borders of the Roman Empire. The Xiongnu did not fall to a plague or a drought, but to the calculated, overwhelming force of a settled civilization that had finally decided to fight back. Their fate asks a difficult question about the nature of power. Is a civilization truly defeated only when its land is taken, or when its people are scattered and its name is forgotten? From the ash-covered ruins of Thera to the silent cities of the Indus Valley, these stories of 25 forgotten cataclysms form a single, humbling mosaic of human history. They reveal a pattern that transcends time and geography. Our most magnificent civilizations, with all their art and power and ingenuity, were often built upon foundations of breathtaking fragility. A stable climate, a river that does not shift its course, a peaceful trade route, these are the silent partners to every great human achievement. When those partners withdrew their support, the grandest empires could crumble into dust. We see the same destructive themes echoing across the millennia. Environmental change turns plenty into famine. The relentless consumption of finite resources, from the palm trees of Easter Island to the fossil water of the Garamontes, leads to a predictable and devastating collapse. And again, we witness the tragic cost of social inflexibility, the stubborn refusal to adapt that doomed the Norse in Greenland as surely as any glacier. These are not just tales from a dusty past, they are urgent parables for our interconnected, globalized world. The pressures that broke these societies are the very same ones we read about in our headlines today. As we stand at the precipice of our own potential cataclysms, these lost empires speak to us with one clear, collective voice. They remind us that our true security lies not in our technological marvels or our economic wealth, but in our capacity for resilience, our wisdom to adapt, and our commitment to become sustainable stewards of this precious planet. What do you believe is the most vital lesson we can learn from these fallen empires? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more journeys into the mysteries of our past.